deliberately lying about my opponent in the case. There's talk, I'll just get it. I would ask you to pick up the phone anyway and call his old law firm and ask why they didn't bring him back. Ask the question whether or not. Ask the question whether or not how he treated the people who work with him. I may be wrong about that. Maybe the phone call I got is not accurate. Try it. Then come back, look me in the eye. And then you'll say, either that never happened, the information you got was wrong, Joe, or it doesn't matter. This is one of the largest embassies in the world. It's not just about dealing with foreign dignitaries. It's about an entire staff apparatus. Mr. Bolton's veracity, his memory. He is a very good lawyer. He's a very good lawyer. But the fact of the matter is, you have the case where Mr. Smith was asked to be fired from his position as a lawyer. Mr. Bolton surely understands that there are certain things that involve your job that if you just get moved off a portfolio and that's your only portfolio, you ain't got a job. You flip French fries in the place and that's your only job you know, and you get moved from your job, you ain't got a job. There's testimony he wanted them punished. If you look at the evidence, as I said and my friend said, not once, not twice, but 3 times he followed this over a period of months. I'll try not to repeat here. Remember that after the Secretary of State supported Ford, as pointed out, he went down and had to go down to buck up the analyst. How many times do you all think that in our careers the Secretary of State's ever felt it necessary to go down and speak to a group of analysts? Come on. That's not unusual? You think it's ever happened before? Maybe it has. But that seemed to me to reach a pretty significant level. Just a few weeks, by the way, talk about his memory, he says, I just wanted him off my, it was what really bothered me about Mr. Westerman was that this guy just did a bad job. He went around me. He lost my confidence. Here's a letter written 2 weeks after, I believe, 2 weeks after this whole incident occurred, dated March the 5th, from Mr. Fleitz, is that how you pronounce his name? Mr. Fleitz, who was Chief of Staff for Mr. Bolton. He writes the letter in response. The response Christian Westerman prepared for Mr. Bolton on Cuba BW was excellent and will be extremely helpful to him. I'm kind of confused here. Lost his confidence? And his Chief of Staff 2 weeks later writes a letter after the berating? So did he really lose confidence, or was it punitive action like other witnesses have said he wanted to have happen? Remember, Mr. Smith was a National Intelligence Officer for Latin America. He didn't even work on WMD issues, the issues Mr. Bolton had in his portfolio. The evidence shows some statements by both Mr. Smith and Mr. Bolton that the two men have never met. Mr. Bolton doesn't even know if he has ever, from his testimony, ever read any intelligence products from Mr. Smith. Yet after Mr. Smith tells people working on this committee that Mr. Bolton's speech at the Heritage Foundation on May the 6th was not appropriately cleared by the intelligence community, Mr. Bolton feels compelled for this special trip to the CIA, which, as he remembered, was on his way home and incidental just to get to know this other guy. And have, I might add, the National let me get this straight, the name of the National Intelligence Council. Mr. Bolton said in that vote, he wanted to know what it did. This is a guy that knee-deep in intelligence matters for his career. And he was going out, a little credibility, folks. Your child comes home and said, "Dad, the only reason I took the car out there to school is I wanted to know the proper spelling of the high school written on the back of the gymnasium where kids park their cars and neck. I was just going out because I never read it before." Come on. Come on. So, here Mr. Bolton, never having met the man, he doesn't know if he's ever read any of his works, Bolton's testimony. He doesn't work on Bolton's issues. The officer works in another agency altogether for Mr. Bolton, yet suddenly he's so concerned that, quote, here's his quote, "I lost confidence in him." He wasn't even working for him. He didn't read any of his analysis, his own testimony. And he lost confidence in him? Or did he get angry and decide to be punitive because that guy dared say, right or wrong, to a committee, "By the way, Mr. Bolton didn't clear his speech"? He lost confidence in him? That's like my losing confidence in your staff. Look, does he really expect us to believe this stuff? Are you really prepared to believe it? The National Intelligence produces National Intelligence estimates. Presumably, Mr. Bolton, what's the argument for Bolton? He is brilliant, he is knowledgeable, he's tough. This brilliant, knowledgeable guy didn't know that the National Intelligence Council produces the National Intelligence estimate? That's what he said under oath. Under oath. I don't imagine he's ever read any of those, huh? Maybe that's why he's so off on intelligence, that he's never read them. Because that's what it would take to not know what this outfit did. And then he talks about this day on his way home, which I won't reiterate. But just so you know, read the record, folks. We have the log. He didn't do it on his way home. He didn't do it as just a flyby. He didn't do it just a welcome. He did it. He had other meetings set up out there that day. He went out of his way to go see the gentleman in question to get this Mr. Smith fired or moved off his portfolio. He came back in to the State Department, and unless he skipped out, his log says that he submitted to us. He had appointments that afternoon at the State Department, and then he went home. Long way home, guys. Long way home. It has been argued by some of my colleagues that no harm was done. Both men kept their job. The language Mr. Bolton used in his speech on Cuba's program was a language cleared by the intelligence community. But that view requires us to believe that Mr. Bolton's extraordinary actions were unknown in the rest of the building. But the opposite is true. According to Carl Ford, the news spread like wildfire. That's his quote in his bureau. Let me remind you of some of the testimony. Ford testified the day after the event, Westerman was clearly shaken. Westerman testified that after Bolton spoke to Neil Silver, he was deeply concerned about, quote, the reemergence of an action to change my work portfolio, end of quote. So many months after the fact. Ford testified, clearly believed that the analysts in INR were very negatively affected by the incident. They were scared, end of quote. And by taking up with 3 different times with managers of INR, Bolton was applying pressure to the entire Bureau itself. A message to senior leadership that Bolton would try to make trouble if an analyst disagreed with him. And finally, remember, as I said, Secretary Powell, my friend said Secretary Powell felt compelled to come down all the way down that red line, not a guy who's not in demand, to feel the need to bolster those folks. I hope we'll agree that the intelligence failures in the last few years have damaged our credibility as a nation. And one of the most honorable men that I've ever known, Colin Powell, as is mentioned, went before the world and said, this is what our intelligence tells us about Iraq weapons. It was all wrong, and he acknowledged it was wrong. In the next few years, we're going to have a crisis, God knows, in Korea. We're going to have a crisis relative to Iraq. We're going to have a crisis relative to possibly Syria. We're going to have crises about what these guys are doing, what weapons they have, don't have, and what their intentions are. And Mr. Bolton is our spokesperson up there. Now you say, well, if that's the case, the Secretary of State will go speak, and that's the case, the President go speak. But who's there day in, day out, sitting in that Security Council, making the deal, convincing people, persuading? Look, the pattern of trying to remove from their portfolios intelligence analysts who disagree with them is matched by 2 profoundly troubling patterns.